Alright guys, so welcome back. This week we're going to kind of do the same thing that we did last week, except we're going to switch teams over from the Browns to Ohio State. And if you have been watching this channel for any point in the past year, you'll know that yes, my fandom goes deep with the Cleveland Browns, but my number one team that I will always be rooting for no matter what happens is going to be the Ohio State Buckeyes. And to give you guys a little bit of a background, I grew up in the Toledo area, which if anyone knows the Toledo area, that is the battleground for that Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. So it was kind of, embedded from me from a very, very young age. I still remember talking with, little kids when I was, in elementary school and middle school and all through high school, of course, of going back and forth with every Michigan fan that I could talk to. And we would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And, that kind of created what my fandom has become now with the borderline, I don't want to say obsession I have with Ohio State, but it's pretty close. And, that is what's brought me to where I am right now. And, that is always going to be something that I have. I'm going to forever say I'm an Ohio State fan first, then I'm a Cleveland sports fan. But Ohio State is always going to come first. So I wanted to kind of do the same style of video that I did last week with the Browns. If you have not checked that out, please go check that out. And I'll give you a little bit of a Cliff Notes of what I did last week, but I kind of looked at what the Browns schedule was last year and went kind of game by game of what I could remember from each game. And then we looked at what the upcoming schedule is going to look like. Not like a prediction type thing. I'll save that for maybe the beginning of preseason to maybe even the end of preseason. We'll do game by game predictions for Ohio State and the Browns. But, I wanted to get my initial thoughts of what the schedule is going to look like, maybe some games to look forward to that could be exciting games, like the Pittsburgh game on, I believe, Thursday night. It's for sure a primetime game. I believe it's Thursday night in Cleveland. That's always a good game. And some games to maybe not look forward to if we're going to stay on the Pittsburgh thing, like the Pittsburgh game in Pittsburgh. So, I wanted to kind of just do that. We looked at that. And then, of course, I looked at the roster for the Browns, what the best case scenario I think is going to be for that Browns roster. We're going to kind of do the same thing here. I'm going to go game by game over here on my computer screen over here and kind of go game by game of what Ohio State season was last year, give my thoughts of what I think of that game now in hindsight. And then we're going to go through, as you can see up here on the screen, the game by game little preview of this coming season for Ohio State, and then we'll look at the new uniforms for Ohio State. Finally, we have the heritage stripes on the the uniforms permanently, which is something that every Ohio State fan, and I was one of the Ohio State fans that never saw the heritage stripes on the uniforms, as a permanent thing. The first time I ever saw them live was the 2014 national championship game against Oregon. No, my bad. The initially the Alabama game, but I saw the first time you kind of notice them because they're a little harder to notice on the white jerseys, unless you know what you're looking for. But when you first notice them, it's on those scarlet jerseys again, and that was the game against Oregon where I first noticed kind of the difference in the uniform. But it's always been basically the helmet stripe that they had for the longest time on the shoulder pads, instead of the heritage stripes, which now they're being called the Buckeye stripes. It's whatever. It's marketing. It's whatever to me. They're basically the same thing. And then we'll look at kind of the new black uniforms and what I think they could have changed a little bit in those uniforms updates that we have now. And then we'll go kind of what I did with the Browns. We'll do the best case scenario for the Ohio State roster on both offense and defense. So let's just jump right into it with the game against Texas in week 1 last year. This was, of course, a game that everyone had, a red circle around. This was going to be Lee Corso's last game. It turned out to be, it was kind of announced a few months, I think, before that Lee Corso was going to retire in that game. Texas was coming in as, I believe, the number 1 team in the country. Ohio State, if my memory serves me correctly, was like 3. and Arch Manning was coming in as this was going to be his first ever road start and his first start as like quarterback one at Texas. He had a few starts when Quinn Ewers was out with injury, but this was going to be his first time getting the keys to the kingdom and being in a live action game against Ohio State, and a team that really looked like they were going to be in a rebuild type year. You're coming off of the national championship. You're losing a ton of guys on defense with JTT, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke, etc. Cody Simon also. And then you go on the offensive side, you lose Will Howard, which was kind of the quarterback that Ohio State fans have been wanting. A guy that doesn't have the precision that a guy like CJ Stroud does, but a guy that you've been dying for that can make stuff happen with his legs and get you those few extra yards that you kind of need if you're setting up for yourself for like a 3rd and short, or he's going to go get you a first down. And Ohio State fans have been kind of dying for that ever since probably for sure Justin Fields, but that was only for 2 years, 1.5 years technically, but because of the COVID year. But ever since kind of the JT Barrett era ended in Ohio State, they've been kind of searching for that quarterback that can, throw the ball as well as run. Kyle McCord was not that guy. CJ Stroud could have been that guy. He just really didn't want to run. And then you had Kyle McCord that, had cement legs and was only a pocket passer type quarterback. And then comes in Will Howard. Ohio State goes on and wins the national championship. Jeremiah Smith, in his freshman season, becomes the best player in college football, hands down, in just one season. And, Ohio State, of course, ends up losing to Michigan at home, and the whole flag plant fight thing. We've been over that multiple times on this channel. And, they go on and have the run that they do in the playoff and win the national championship very, very convincingly, except the game against Texas. And Ohio State going on in winning that national championship, you kind of look forward and being like, okay, Texas is going to come back for revenge. Yes, it is in Columbus, but they're going to return more. They're going to have that revenge factor. And Ohio State's coming off a national championship. They might not be as hungry to get back to that national championship. And there all those narratives, I believe, like Paul Feinbaum was even saying that Texas was going to go into Columbus and destroy Ohio State. That is not what happened whatsoever. And it became more of a defensive slugfest. And we honestly thought that both of these offenses were looking very bad. Ohio State was holding stuff back, and it looked like Arch Manning was not very, capable of taking the full offense in a very hostile environment in Columbus. Still sucks that wasn't a night game, but Ohio State fans did not care that game was at noon. And, it turned into a defensive slugfest, and now we knew that Ohio State defense was one of the best defenses in all of college football last year, with Caleb Downs and Davis Igbinosun and, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, who came on a little bit more later in the season. But you had so many guys on that defense, that Sonny Styles and Lorenzo Styles, also huge contributors in that defense. But that was one of the best defenses since 2019 with Ohio State and with considered Ohio State teams. And, you never really knew that, but it turns out that it was going to be a slugfest. Ohio State up 14-0. Texas scores a little bit later in the fourth quarter, and Ohio State just shuts it down. Then Ohio State wins that game, goes on to 1-0, I believe becomes at least number 2 or number 1 in the country, and Texas slides. You go on, you beat Grambling State 70-0. That was kind of the offensive slugfest that you were looking for in that week 1 game. It comes out and it's like, okay, we've kind of calmed down a little bit. That defense is still looking amazing. And you're looking at this team and you're really confident. You go in, you beat Ohio 37-9, same type of thing. Defense shuts down, and is only given up, was it 20 points all season in 3 games, which is crazy. No, that's a lie. Whatever. They not even that. What was it? 16. 16 points. So not even 20 points is what I was trying to say there. And then you go into your first road game against Washington and struggled in your first half. I remember being very upset with Ohio State, and then they turn it on and win 24-6. Same thing, Ohio State still has not given up more than 14 points in a game. And that's an underrated environment in Washington. I remember Ohio State kind of being a little bit, slow in that first quarter and even in that second quarter. And I believe Jeremiah Smith actually, got a late score in that first half to bring Ohio State into the lead there. And it was a frustrating game, I think I remember. And then you turn around, you destroy Minnesota. Minnesota, not a very good team. I believe that was one of your night games actually too. It was that in Ohio, it's ridiculous that the Big Ten continues to have this contract with Fox, and hopefully we can get that sorted out. I don't mind being on Fox, by the way. I'm not one of these guys that says that every sports thing needs to be on ESPN and only ESPN. I think it's good to have some competition between these companies, even though they're all owned by one big parent company. It's just frustrating that Ohio State's night games, which is known for having an awesome night environment, go look at the Penn State game in 2017, the Penn State game in 2021, the Tennessee game in the college football playoff 2 years ago. There's so many cases, that we've had with great night environments, and it sucks that Ohio State just cannot seem to get a big game at night. We'll see if that changes this year. Kind of unlikely, but we'll see. And then you go on and win the Illabuck in Illinois 34-16, kind of dominate that game defensively. You give up double digits for the first time in the season, but it is what it was there. And Jeremiah Smith still looks like Jeremiah Smith. That's the thing. That Sayan was still one of your best quarterbacks, still learning, but you had Jeremiah Smith, and that was really all that mattered, that one team didn't have Jeremiah Smith and one team didn't. You know what I mean? So you handle Illinois, win the Illabuck, then you shut out Wisconsin. And this was at the point where, Wisconsin's coach is being, his head is basically on the chopping block. Wisconsin actually didn't end up firing Fickell that year or this year, but I'm assuming it's going to happen in the next year or two. I think Wisconsin needs a fresh start. But, everything was kind of pointing towards Fickell being fired at the end of the year, if not right then and there after that game. You lose. Ohio State wins 34-0 against Wisconsin. And then you go back home and you face Penn State, a team that at this point was basically dead in the water. James Franklin was fired at this point. This was a game that everyone was circling. Penn State coming into the season was one of the two teams that you were looking at to win the national championship. It was them and basically Clemson. It's ironic because both teams completely disappointed and actually ended up playing each other in the bowl game, just not for a national championship like everyone was expecting. And, you handle Penn State. Actually, Penn State did have a couple opportunities to, pull an upset over Ohio State, but their defense just was not good enough to hold Jeremiah Smith. Caleb Downs actually, if I remember, almost got called for a targeting penalty that honestly should have been targeting. He did not, though. So you go and survive against Penn State, and that was one of Penn State's last couple of games that, you were looking at and being like, okay, we've had a horrible season, but if we can beat Ohio State, then that would be good. So this was one of Penn State's final stands. And Ohio State at home, this was actually supposed to be a blackout night game, and it just didn't end up being a night game, unfortunately. But I think Ohio State was slated to get this night game against Penn State, but Penn State just was not good enough for, a network like Peacock and NBC to take that as a night game. So Fox ended up taking it, I think, as Big Noon Kickoff. And then you go on the road and you play Purdue. I don't remember a lot from this game. It was what it was. Purdue is one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. Hopefully they can turn it around in this upcoming season, but one of the worst teams in the Big Ten last year. You play UCLA. They had a couple of miracles against Penn State, who turns out to not be very good. But you go home and you play UCLA. You handle them 48-10. You stay home and you play Rutgers, again, another bottom feeder of the Big Ten consistently, or historically, as I should say, and you beat them 42-9, not very close there. And then that was your look-ahead spot against, of course, the next week being the Michigan game in Ann Arbor. And then you go on the road and you play Michigan. I was at that game, one of the best games of my entire life, probably the best game of my entire life that I have been to. It's either that or the Indiana game from 24. I was at that game as well, the Caleb Downs punt return. I was at that game. I was in the Ohio State student section. One of the really, really cool games, my first full Ohio State game that I have been to. But the Michigan game, on another level. It was a storybook ending to the past couple of years where Michigan has had Ohio State's number, whether they were the better team, like in 2023, or they were not, like in 2024. And, that was one of the best games and the most gratifying games to ever be at if you were an Ohio State fan. I know Michigan fans after this were furious. This ended up being Sherrone Moore's last game as head coach of the Michigan Wolverines. And, you go on and they have that whole story with Sherrone Moore. But this was one of the more gratifying games that Ohio State has had in a long time. It's this and maybe the Penn State game from 2017 when, Penn State got that win over Ohio State that really should not have been. My bad. I was talking about the blocked punt game in Happy Valley. But anyways, the game in 2025 in Ann Arbor kind of started off the same way that it had been for the past couple of years. You had the interception with Sayin on the sideline. He was trying to throw to Jeremiah Smith, a miscommunication, trying to throw a back shoulder, and it gets picked off. And it looks like Michigan is going to drag Ohio State back into the phone booth, exactly where Ohio State did not want to be against Michigan. They fell into this trap in 2024 in Columbus. And it looked like Ryan Day was going to fall for the same trick. Turns out he did not. And Julian Sayin, Jeremiah Smith, and Bo Jackson, specifically Bo Jackson, takes over the game after that. And with Ohio State's run game starting to go, that opened the door for the passing game. Jeremiah Smith gets the fourth down touchdown that was, right in the sideline that we were at and at the game. Carnell Tate takes the long bomb touchdown in the third quarter on the first drive. Brandon Inniss catches a touchdown pass right in front of us, same side, right before halftime, and that was all she wrote. Bryce Underwood was put in a box. The defense had a masterclass of a game. Caleb Downs had an awesome game. I remember him getting a really big hit right at the end of the fourth quarter, or not the end of the fourth quarter, but during the fourth quarter. Ohio State fans take over the big house for the first time since 2019, and Michigan protects their M midfield logo because they're soft. So anyways, that was just one of the best games, and it turned out to be, unfortunately, Ohio State's last win of the season that year. But you turn around it was the next week. So you turn around the next week and you go and play Indiana, a team that everyone was looking forward to. This was kind of like a freight train coming both at each other, and Indiana escapes because Jaden Fielding cannot kick field goals, which was something that Ohio State dealt with all year, was their kicker problems. Probably the past couple of years, actually, was their kicker problem. That's going to be something that Ohio State needs to address. And hopefully they have. Fielding is now gone, so he's done. But Fielding misses a field goal, and Indiana wins by 3. That's it right there. Of course, I think Indiana ended up missing a field goal themselves, so that kind of cancels out. But if Fielding makes the field goal and maybe Sayin hits the Bo Jackson or Isaiah West out of the backfield there, and Ohio State doesn't have to go for the field goal and gets a touchdown instead, maybe Ohio State's the number 1 seed and they're playing Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and Indiana's the one that's got to go play Miami. And maybe this season looks completely different. Maybe Miami still makes it to the College Football Playoff National Championship and beats Ohio State there. But if Ohio State makes it to the 1 seed, I think they kind of go on the same run that Indiana did. So this was I honestly think that this was almost the bona fide national championship game. It was about where you were going to be placed. Alabama was a fraud team, and Oregon, maybe Ohio State does have some trouble against Oregon. that Indiana clearly did not. Indiana clearly had the mental advantage over Oregon last year, but you never know. You never know. That was one of the teams that I feared last year was Oregon, and now you got to go play them this coming year. But you got to see. So, unfortunately, Ohio State loses the Big Ten championship, their first Big Ten championship appearance, actually, since the 2020 COVID year against Northwestern. And, Michigan was winning Big Ten championships for, I think they won 3 straight Big Ten championships, of course, in 2024. They almost didn't even make a bowl game, but 2024, Ohio State loses to Michigan. That allows Penn State to get into the Big Ten championship. They play Oregon. Oregon survives against Penn State. Ohio State misses another chance at a Big Ten championship. This was their first time getting back to Indy since 2020, which is crazy to think about, but Ohio State just comes up short. Then you go play a Miami Hurricanes team that looked like they were going to be basically screwed out of a college football playoff chance because Notre Dame is soft and they can't join a conference and play one of their weakest schedules this coming year. But it's so frustrating that Notre Dame basically gets a pass for being crybabies and throwing temper tantrums, and it's like, the parents giving the kid a lollipop because they're throwing a temper tantrum in the middle of the store. That's basically what the committee just did for Notre Dame. But that's a personal issue with me. So Miami plays Notre Dame, I think, week 1 or week 2 of the regular season. They beat Notre Dame, and then they ended up losing, I think, to SMU or Louisville, one of the two for Miami. That brings them down in the standings. Notre Dame's only loss of the playoff of the season was to that Miami team, and the committee drops Miami below Notre Dame, puts Notre Dame in the college football playoff. Miami is looking like a team that's going to be one of the first 2 teams out looking in, and everyone was up in arms about it. It was going to be something completely stupid. The ACC didn't has weird tiebreakers with that, so it ended up being like Duke and Louisville or somebody in the ACC championship instead of Miami. So Miami wasn't getting that game to play and basically guarantee themselves in the playoff. Instead, they're looking at home, worrying that they might get left out for a team that they beat, but that ended up not happening. The committee gets it right. They put Notre Dame out of the playoff. They bring Miami in. They give them, I believe, the 10 seed. I'm not honestly positive because I think so. And then they play Texas A&M on the road. And that was, I believe, the first time a road team won in the first round of the college football playoff. It was also like a really windy day. Offenses couldn't get going. I think still on neutral field, Miami still wins against Texas A&M. But Texas A&M loses to Miami. Miami goes on to, I believe, the Cotton Bowl. Yes, they go on and play Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, dominate Ohio State. Along the lines of scrimmage, Julian Sayin has one of his worst games, or probably his worst game since the Texas game. And Ohio State's defense just could not, make up the difference because Julian Sayin unfortunately did have a pick 6 in this game. And Ohio State's defense just could not make up what Julian Sayin mistakes. It is unfortunate. Ohio State fought valiantly. They ended up losing by 10 to Miami. Miami, of course, goes on to lose to Indiana in the national championship. So Ohio State's only 2 losses are to the teams that made the national championship game. And although, yes, that is a good thing to kind of say, like we were for sure a top 3 team in the country, that still stings if you're an Ohio State fan that you were that close and you lose by 10 to Miami and you lose by 3 to Indiana, both on neutral fields. It just sucks. Ohio State had chances in both of those games to get it done. They didn't. They go into the Big Ten championship week as the number 1 team in the country. A few weeks later, they're completely out of the college football season and watching from home. So, that was kind of a look back on what happened last year. Now, let me just go off the top of my head of the guys that we lose for this upcoming season. Of course, Caleb Downs, the leader of that defense, one of the best players, regardless of position, that I have seen. Maybe not getting a lot on the stat sheet, but if you watch Caleb Downs, he is going to be one of the best players on that Cowboys defense. And then you lose, Carnell Tate, your number 2 wide receiver, behind Jeremiah Smith. And the only reason Carnell Tate was the number 2 wide receiver was because Jeremiah Smith is the best player in college football for the past 2 years. So not a fault on Carnell Tate. He goes to, I believe, the Tennessee Titans. You lose your worst guy on the offensive line. So we'll see what happens with that. And I believe Tegra Shabola, I believe was his name. You lose Jaden Fielding. I already discussed that. You keep Julian Sayin, you keep Bo Jackson, you keep Isaiah West, you keep Jeremiah Smith, you keep Brandon Inniss. But a lot of that defense is gone. Davis Igbinosun, who, had his ups and downs, but last year it was one of his ups, had not as nearly many penalties as he did in 2024. And, you're looking at this defense. Caden Curry also, who had his career game, I guess, I believe against Indiana. You lose him. You lose a couple of more guys, but like Lorenzo Styles and Sonny Styles. You also lose, and this defense looks a lot different now. So it's all about what you're going to do with that defense. Matt Patricia is going to have one of his best coaching jobs of his entire life, honestly, with this Ohio State defense. This is not the last year's defense. It does not have nearly the same ceiling, or maybe even not even the same floor that this Ohio State defense did last year. And it's all up kind of to Matt Patricia and even the Ohio State offense to make up the ground for that. They keep a lot of their key pieces from last year's offense, does Ohio State. And you keep the majority of your good offensive linemen, or all of your good offensive linemen, which isn't really saying a lot because that offensive line has been under some scrutiny for the past couple of seasons. But they're a lot older now, so we got to wait and see about what that is going to look like. So I've kind of rambled on a little bit. Let's go into the schedule for this upcoming college football season for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's go on to week 1. So it is Ball State at home. It's a warm-up game. You're going to get the rust off a little bit. Ohio State will have no problems with Ball State. Then you go on the road and play your toughest test, of course, so far in this season. But you're going to be your toughest test for a while. You play Texas in Austin. This is going to be the first time that you go down there since the Cotton Bowl. Against Texas, of course, the first time you're going down there since the Cotton Bowl, the first time since like 2004-ish, early 2000s, of course, when Ohio State had the home-and-home series with Texas last time, the first time you're going to be down there. You did win that one, so we'll see what happens with that, I believe. But Arch Manning is coming back. Texas has a lot of pieces coming back, a lot of new guys like Cam Coleman coming in, the wide receiver out of Auburn. He's going in and probably being slated as Texas' number 1 wide receiver. That offense is going to be that offensive line is not going to be as bad as it was in the beginning of the year. It's going to be a lot more veteran. And it's a night game, something that Ohio State did not have last year. The advantage is to Texas's crowd. And people can say that how overrated this Texas, stadium is and crowd is. This is going to be one of the bigger games that Texas has had in a while. Ohio State has beaten Texas on a neutral field and at Ohio State. It's up to Texas to now defend their home field in Austin. And it's going to be a night game. It's going to be one of the best environments that Texas has had in a while. And it's up to Ohio State to get off of the rust that they had maybe at Ball State, because you're going to need to get all that rust off against Ball State if you're going to want to go win at Texas. Another little warm-up game, maybe if Ohio State loses, let's say at Texas, this is a game to kind of get your frustrations out against Kent State. You'll probably win that with no problem. Then you're gonna stay home and play for the Illibuk again. I'm glad that this is going to be hopefully a more consistent game. I believe the last time Ohio State and Illinois played was like 2015, before last year. And I'm hoping that this series kind of stays maybe twice every couple of years. The Illibuk, I love college football rivalry trophies. Maybe I can make a video on that, on my favorite rivalry trophies for college football. But the Illibuk, a really cool rivalry trophy with a really cool backstory. Ohio State should win this game. Then you go on the road and play Iowa for the first time in Kinnick since the 2017 game with JT Barrett, where Iowa blows Ohio State out of the water. This was right after the Ohio State-Penn State game. If you remember that from 2017, I actually just discussed that earlier in the video. But Ohio State coming off one of their highest of highs, you go on the road and you play Iowa, and they blow the doors off of an Ohio State team and end Ohio State's playoff hopes that year. And this is going to be a very tough game in a very tough environment. Ohio State, this is going to be Ohio State, Ryan Day, all of these guys' first time in Iowa. They played Iowa in Columbus before, Ryan Day has, but never in Kinnick. This Iowa team is going to want to get up for this game. They're going to be ranked most likely unless they have a slip up somewhere. That environment's going to be rowdy. It's probably going to be big noon kickoff. We'll see what that timestamp is. But it'll be fun. It'll be a good environment. That'll be Ohio State's second biggest game so far of the season. You go on the road, or no, you don't go on the road, sorry. You come home and you play Maryland, a team that is going to probably be a bottom feeder again. This is going to be your homecoming game, it looks like. So maybe a 3:30 to maybe even noon game, maybe on a Big Ten network. Should have no problems here. And then you're going to go on the road and play an Indiana team that is going to most likely be one of the best teams in the country. Kirk Cignetti is probably the best coach in the country right now. Ohio State is going to be looking for revenge. I know every Ohio State fan has got this, this game circled. Of course, it's the Oregon game and the Michigan game that everyone's going to probably have circled. But this is going to be a revenge factor. Yes, this is one of the, this is going to be Indiana's biggest road or home environment they've probably ever had. But Ohio State's got to have their revenge on their mind. They have to remember what the Big Ten championship game felt like. Fernando Mendoza is gone. Omar Cooper is gone. Yes, Kurt Cignetti is still there, and he probably will be there for the foreseeable future. But it's all going to depend on what Ohio State team are we going to see. Are we going to see a team like last year with the offense not being so good in big environments and a defense that's going to be regressed? If that's the case, Indiana's probably going to win this game. But if Ohio State's offense can, be a lot better in big game situations, if the defense can stay consistent from what they were last year, maybe not be as good, but still be serviceable and make stops when they need to, then Ohio State has a good chance for not an upset, but a win. Ohio State has consistently gone into Indiana and but they've gone into Indiana and taken over. Indiana's not really had a great home field environment for the past couple of years. That has, of course, changed with Kurt Cignetti coming in, but Ohio State's fans have normally packed Indiana Stadium. Ohio State now has to go into Indiana with a bunch of Indiana fans aren't going to be able to sell or not going to sell their tickets to Ohio State fans. They're going to pack it out. This is going to be one of their better home field environments that they've ever had. So that's going to be another test. You get your bye, which is at a pretty good time. Maybe you kind of want it before the Indiana game, but I like it where it is. You go on the road, you stay on the road, and you play USC. This is your toughest stretch, by the way. Indiana, USC, Oregon. This is your toughest stretch for Ohio State. If you can get out of here with maybe one loss, I'd call that a perfect win. I don't see a world where you all go 3-0 here, but if you go 2-1, I'm pretty sure that's going to set you up for a playoff run. If you go 1-2, that's going to be an issue, especially with that Texas game before and the Michigan game coming up. So USC, Jaden Maiava is in at quarterback. Lincoln Riley is still saying that, he's adapted and all this other stuff with, the defense and what they've had, of course, with Lincoln Riley, that is, with Oklahoma and USC and his issues on defense. He said that he's fixed it. He said that every year. So we'll see. But this is going to be a tough environment. The LA Coliseum is going to be rocking, So it is what it is. You're going to have to go into another hostile environment and play USC. I promise I'm done stopping. But now you're going to go from being on the road in USC, you're going all the way out to California. Now you come all the way back to Columbus, and now you're going to go play your probably the toughest team that you're going to end up playing all season in the Oregon Ducks. And if you told me, Dylan, your life depends on you picking the national champion this coming year, I'm going to tell you Oregon. They have Dante Moore back. There's so I'm not even gonna go on the list of how many guys they're bringing back. Dan Lanning is back though at head coach as well. Oregon looks like one of the best teams in the entire country, and they are being criminally underrated right now. If I'm a betting person, I'm going to take Oregon on the odds to win the national championship right now. They're just being so underrated. I saw some people have Oregon ranked below Oklahoma. What are we doing? Oregon is a top 3 team in the country, and I don't understand why people are underrating them right now. Dante Moore, if he would have went out of Oregon and declared for the draft, he would have been picked 2 in this NFL draft going to New York. Instead, he turns and returns to Oregon. Dylan Raiola transfers in to become his backup, basically. Oregon is loaded everywhere. And, their defense they returned the majority of their defense. They returned their quarterback, and their quarterback that has consistently been one of the best quarterbacks in the country last year. Oregon is just loaded. And yes, the advantage is you're at home here, and hopefully it's a 3:30 game. It's late in the year. What is this? November 7th, so it's going to be late in the year. It's going to get dark pretty early. It's going to be the Penn State game. I keep coming back to that game, but the Penn State-Ohio State game in 2017, that started at 3:30. And, the second half, it's basically a night game for Ohio State. So if Ohio State can keep this game close, that environment's going to be, more of a night environment the later that game goes into it. It's just a matter of, can Ohio State keep this game close? Right now, neutral field, I feel like you will favor Oregon. But it's all about that Ohio State environment. And when Ohio State's environment is on, it is one of the scariest environments in all of college football. It's just about if we can get there. So right now, that is one of the toss-up games that I'm looking at. And it's scary to have a toss-up game, especially when you're at home. It's okay to have a toss-up game when you're on the road because maybe you're the better team neutral field. I would say right now, neutral field, Oregon is probably the better team, and they could be my pick to win the national championship this coming year. But you play them in Columbus at home, so that's an advantage for you. You play Northwestern and Nebraska. Let's just combine those two basically. Nebraska is a look-ahead spot against, it is in Lincoln. That environment can get a little rowdy when Nebraska is on. It's just a matter of fact is if Nebraska is going to be, are they going to have a pulse by the end of this? By the time Ohio State plays Nebraska, Northwestern is still going to be a bottom feeder team, especially in the NIL era. They thrived in the non-NIL era. Thrived. They got to a Big Ten championship once. But this new NIL era, Northwestern is still trying to get what their place is in college football right now. That's going to be, I don't want to say pushover, but it's most likely a guaranteed win there. Nebraska, I think it's a little less more of a guaranteed win, but I still think Ohio State is likely to win that. And then you play you don't play Ohio State. This is senior day, and Ohio State has not won against Michigan at home since 2018, I'm sorry, almost 10 years ago at this point. This is going to be a big test. Is it a fluke that Ryan Day got over Michigan? Can Kyle Whittingham turn into something? And let's not remember, the best coach in the modern era for Michigan was probably Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh was, 0-5 in his start against Ohio State? Yes, Ryan Day is 2-4? 21, 22, 23, 24. Yeah, so 2-4. His record is against Michigan. And the difference is that those 3 Michigan teams beside, I'm not counting the 2024 team, but 21, 22, and 23 were the peak of Michigan football in the modern era. Of course, ending with that 2023 national championship. You can say whatever you want about Connor Stallions. The fact is the NCAA is a toothless figurehead, and they're not going to do anything about that, unfortunately for us, in the integrity of college football. But that's another rant for another day. Michigan coming into Columbus, they've won the past 2 times. Let's not make it 3 in a row, please. Can we start getting a streak of our own and maybe see a field storm for the first time in a while? That would be really nice. So that's going to be Ohio State's 2026 early preview. Not going to give you a record prediction or anything like that. We'll save that for a later time. Let's go to the new uniforms for Ohio State. All right, so up on the screen here is going to be Ohio State's new uniforms for this upcoming season, and I love them. Let's just start off. Let's just go from left to right here. The Sub-Zero uniforms. I love these uniforms. Last time we wore them was the game against Oregon in Autzen, where Ohio State lost because Will Howard slid with no time left. You can argue I'm one of in the group that there was a second left on the clock. There's not a guarantee Jaden Fielding makes the field goal anyways. But the last time we did wear these was that game against Oregon. Ohio State did say that they are slated to wear every single uniform in this rotation this season. We'll see. Maybe this is the uniforms you wear the Sub-Zero at Texas or, the USC game. I would prefer them to be USC. Let's see. Let's just do the core ways for Texas. Maybe a USC. I got really nothing. Maybe Indiana. Indiana would be cool to have there. But really, really good uniforms. Of course, you have the new Buckeye stripes that you can't really see in these pictures in the away uniforms. You can see it better on the core home uniform, what they're going to look like on the home uniforms. Core away looks good. The only real change here is going to be the stripes and then the little pattern on the neck that they're doing, which is a nice little touch there, but I love those stripes. The home uniforms, probably my personal favorite. I love the black uniforms. I love the scarlet uniforms. I'm a red guy, if you can't tell. I'm a red guy. And I just love the uniforms. I love the stripes. Some of my favorite uniforms when they bring these out. Like, this is a thing that I always look forward to, even when they were just like considered a playoff thing and eventually just a national championship thing in the 12-team era. But really, really good. I love these uniforms. Sand looks awesome in them. Not a whole lot to say, but let's go to what they're calling the tunnel vision uniforms here. Man, I love them. I really, really do. And it's rumored that they're going to be wearing them against Oregon. I almost said Penn State. Oregon in their matchup here, which should be 3:30-ish. It's not going to be a night game. I think the Miami Notre Dame game is slated to be that same week. So that's going to be the NBC/Peacock night game. But the 3:30 also works for us, considering it's basically a night game when it's this late in the year on the schedule. But I love these uniforms. I'm okay with the heritage stripes being like kind of glossy. I love the black helmet. Really, really cool to kind of have that little more not necessarily secretive, but a little bit more detail in the helmets than just a normal Ohio State helmet, but it's just black instead of silver or gray. If you want the scarlet and gray, if you want to just have a gray helmet there. Love the stickers, the alternate Buckeye stickers there. This is just an A++ all around for every single one of these uniforms. Actually, I'll take that back, because the only problem I have here on these uniforms is going to be on the all scarlet uniforms. And it's a very, very small detail, but it's something that I'm going to kind of nitpick here because I love these uniforms so much. None of these uniforms I'm going to say I do not like. I love all of these uniforms. The only thing that I have an issue with is the pant stripe on the all scarlet uniforms, which you can't really see, but it is going to be kind of a heritage stripe / Buckeye stripe design on the pant leg. I like the just helmet stripe down the pant leg. I think you keep just the regular heritage stripe on the jersey shoulders and keep everything else there. I do believe that they are changing the pant leg for the all scarlet uniforms. I wish they would have just stuck in with the regular pants that they've had before. But other than that, I have no comments. I love these uniforms. Maybe if you're looking at an area to wear these all scarlet uniforms, maybe it's, I can't even tell you. Let me relook at the Ohio State schedule here, because there's not really another night game besides, maybe this is an Illinois game. I could see them wearing these against Illinois this upcoming year. Like, you can't wear them against Texas, obviously. Iowa, that's probably a no. That's another opportunity to wear those Sub-Zero uniforms, is that Iowa game. Can't know, like Northwestern, Maryland. There's not really another opportunity to wear, a big opportunity, I should say, to wear these all scarlet uniforms. I do like that the idea of wearing the all black ones against Oregon. But I don't want them to wear them like on a road game or anything like that. Let them be a home only uniform. Maybe you wear them in the playoff if you get like a home playoff game. That would be okay with that, to make these kind of your, like, if it's a night game or something like that, kind of like it was against Tennessee, wear them for that. But that's really the only thing I can really think of. Little short version here of my reaction to the uniforms. I said I would do a video about this. I did not do that. I completely apologize. But I figured I'd get that in here just so we have something to go on here. But an A++, or an A+. I shouldn't say A++ because of the little change that I would make for the all scarlet uniforms. But an A+ on the uniform change. I'm so happy that we're getting these heritage stripes / Buckeye stripes back on the uniform, and these aren't just going to be a national championship only style. All right, last little key part here, and then we'll get out of here. We'll do the offense and then the defense, and then we'll get out of here. But let's just look at this offensive lineup before we do defense. So, first of all, we're going to keep, the same core people here in this offense. Julian Sain returns. Bo Jackson is there. The majority of the offensive line is here. Jeremiah Smith is a returning starter. There's a lot of returning starters here. But the interesting thing is where the key positions is we're going to have a lot more new guys here. Of course, Devin McCune I have up here in key subs. You can put him over Chris Henry Jr. right now if you want. I think Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Inniss are good locks to be in the starting lineup. But Devin McCune and Chris Henry Jr. are kind of battling for that third wide receiver position. I like Brock Boyd and Chris Henry Jr. to kind of flip around in that position, and then Devin McCune and Brandon Inniss can kind of be the flip-flops in there. But Jeremiah Smith should be on the field as much as possible. Put Brock Boyd, who was a standout in, off-season practices so far, put him and Chris Henry Jr. kind of in the same tier if you want, or same position. And then have Devin McCune and Brandon Inniss, both really twitchy guys, put in the slot there and let them take advantage of their speed when it comes to maybe a third cornerback, where everyone's going to be double teaming Jeremiah Smith. And if Chris Henry Jr. can live up to his expectations, you got to worry about both of them. That opens the door for a guy like Brandon Inniss or Devin McCune to get open touches here. And then Nate Roberts at tight end here. He is going to be a guy that's going to be anew on the starting lineup. He has been on the program for, I believe, 2 years so far as a backup. Of course, what's his name? Max Clare was the starter for Ohio State. And then the tight end out of Ohio University, Will Kazmarek, there it is. He also ran out of eligibility last year, so he is gone as well. Nate Roberts turns into the starter at tight end. He is kind of a little bit of an unknown. Of course, we've got to see him a little bit in garbage time areas last season, but a lot of potential here. I think if he can kind of help out this offensive line that, is probably going to deal with the same problems that they had last year with, the run blocking and the pass blocking. If Nate Roberts can kind of help out with that, as long as being, he doesn't have to be Max Clare, but he also doesn't need to be, just a blocking tight end. If he can be that hybrid guy that can block as well as do a little bit more on the receiving side as well, that would be Ohio State's perfect tight end, like a Cade Stover, if you want to do that. Cade Stover on this team would be the perfect tight end if Nate Roberts can be like Cade Stover. Not saying that he has to have the upside that Cade Stover did in his last season, but if he can be a Cade Stover light, I feel like that would be perfect. Ian Moore is going to be Ohio taking over on that tackle spot for Tegra Shabola. He is out. Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, and Austin Sareveld are returning. Those are going to be your core guys there. Austin Sareveld, I believe, was actually a tackle last year, but he's going to move into guard. I feel like he more fits that guard position. And Carson Hinsman is a starter for his third year now. I think he is a senior. He started in 2023. Did not really work out there. Was a backup in 2024. And then and the center who is escaping me, the guy from Alabama that transferred from Alabama, I forget his name. He ends up getting hurt. Hinsman takes over and is a serviceable center for the Ohio State's playoff run and at the end of the year into the playoff run, and then turns into a center full-time and is very, very good. Last year, he's coming back for his last year as a Buckeye. And then Luke Montgomery, one of probably my favorite offensive linemen in this group. Yet again, if I've said it before, I grew up in the Toledo area. Luke Montgomery and his brother grew up around the Toledo area in Findlay, Ohio. I've seen his brother Ryan Montgomery, a quarterback that is currently enrolled at the University of Georgia. I saw him play football in high school. He's a few years younger than I am, but Luke Montgomery is a few years older than I am. And unfortunately did not get to see him play in high school. But, of course, him being a Buckeye, everyone knew who Luke Montgomery was back then. So he returns at guard, one of the cornerstones for this offensive line. I feel like the interior of this offensive line is going to be elite. It's about what those tackles can do. Phillip Daniels is coming in. Ian Moore has struggled against Miami. He came in, I think, the second half and struggled because Ohio State was just trying to figure out a way to stop Miami's defensive ends. They brought in Ian Moore. He was serviceable, but not nearly as good as you wanted him to be. So it's all a question about these tackles and what they're going to do. Maybe Sareveld actually does end up kicking back out to tackle, and Phillip Daniels goes into guard. We'll see. You can mix and match these guys. I feel like the only guys that are locks here, of course, barring an injury, are Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery in position wise. Maybe Ian Moore. You can also probably put Ian Moore there, but I think it's more likely that someone takes his place rather than he moves somewhere else. So you can put him in at tackle, technically as a lock. I don't think he plays guard this season, but we'll see. I already mentioned the wide receivers. Jeremiah Smith is going to be the best player in college football, barring an injury this year, and hopefully that does not happen. Should win the Broyles Award. Or not the Broyles Award, the Blitnikoff Award. Should have won it last year. Arguably should have won it the year before as well. Didn't. He will be the favorite for that award this season. And, it's all going to come down to what can Julian Sayin do. Tavian St. Clair has been breathing down his neck this past offseason. Some Ohio State fans are even calling Julian Sayin to be benched in favor of Tavian St. Clair. And, it's up to Julian Sayin to prove those doubters wrong because he had a bit of a rough patch in those last two games against Indiana and Miami. You just got to see. So I feel like everyone just needs to calm down. Julian Sayin was one of the best quarterbacks in the country last year. There was no fluke in that. He was in Heisman contention for a reason, and he's going to have the best weapons in college football on the receiver front. And then we'll go to the running back room. I have up there Isaiah West as one of the subs. You can throw in him and Bo Jackson down there as well. I put Bo Jackson in there just because he's going to be the starter, but it's now in modern football, not even college football, but football, it is more of a running back by committee group. You see it all the time in the NFL. You're seeing it a lot of times in college football as well. So Isaiah West and Bo Jackson, 1A and 1B. So that is it right there for the offense. Julian Sayin, Bo Jackson, Jeremiah Smith, Nate Roberts, Ian Moore, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Austin Sareveld, Phillip Daniels, Brandon Inniss, and Chris Henry Jr. are going to be my best case scenario for starters. You can throw in Isaiah West, Devin McCown, and Brock Boyd as your key subs. Another thing that you do not see here are backup tight ends and backup offensive linemen here in my key subs. That's going to be an issue, is going to be the depth of both of those rooms. Unfortunately, injuries happen in football, and Ohio State was lucky last year to not have the injuries in offensive line. A few years ago, they could not say that. So it's up to basically fate about what's going to happen in the injury department. I hope no one gets injured this college football season, regardless of team. No one wishes that, but that's not reality. That's not going to be very accurate. But that is the offense. Let's move on to the defense. So the last little part of this is obviously going to be the defense. And before we even get into player by player and where I have going on each position here, let's just look at this defense as a depth chart as a whole. You know, obviously there's not going to be the star talent that you kind of thought of last year. Even before the first in week 1 against Texas, you knew you were going to have Caleb Downs on this defense, and you know, there's not that guy on that defense anymore that's going to be the player that you're going to look at like to lead this defense. Maybe that guy is going to be either Jermaine Matthews or Kenyatta Jackson Jr., but you just got to see. Kenyatta Jackson and Jermaine Matthews were guys that played well on this defense last year, and you know, you're only going to come through once in a couple of classes, a guy like Caleb Downs, you know, a guy like Jeremiah Smith on that offense. You're only going to have a couple of those. But, you know, with with Caleb Downs gone and guys like Arvell Reese and, you know, why am I blanking? Davis Igbinosun. That's what I meant. Davis Igbinosun, who was a veteran on this team in the cornerback room. Caleb Downs was a younger guy, but still one of the best players in all of college football, regardless of position last year. And Arvell Reese, one of the better defensive lineman prospects that Ohio State has had since maybe, Chase Young in 2019, which is a big bar to set. But it's something that he earned. He was better than both Jack Sawyer and JTT last year. You know, Jonathan Cooper also, he was probably better than in college. We'll see what he can do in the NFL, Arvell Reese. But there's a reason why Arvell was drafted as high as he was in the first round. And going to, I want to say New York. But that's just going to be kind of what you're going to notice in this defense. So let's just go position by position here. We'll start at the bottom and make our way up. So let's go, like I already said, Kenyatta Jackson is going to be one of those guys that this defense is going to look forward to as a leader in this group, a veteran presence in this group. Matt Patricia is going to want Kenyatta Jackson to take another step, and he had a really good step last season, but it's up to him to make that next leap and become one of those guys that can become a first round talent. And then you got a transfer out of UCF in John Walker. Haven't watched a lot of his tape. I got to do some more studying on him, but he is going to probably fill up one of those defensive tackle spots. Edric Houston, a guy who played decent amount of minutes last year. Of course, there was a bunch of guys before him that were taking up some of those plays and roster spots, but now he's going to be able to get the start. Oh, and let's see what he does. He's also going to be a veteran on this team, just not as much of a playing time experience that a guy like Kenyatta Jackson is going to have at the beginning of this season. And then there's a guy like Bo Atkinson. And Bo Atkinson was a guy that everyone was covering out of the transfer portal. I think it was UNC that he transferred out of. There was, obviously Ohio State and Georgia, I believe, was in the hunt for him when he came out of the portal. And there was a lot of hype coming into Bo Atkinson last year, and he deeply disappointed me. I remember him disappearing in games and becoming basically unplayable in the college football playoff, and even in the Big Ten championship game. There wasn't a lot of stuff that he was able to get in on at the end of last season. And that was a disappointing thing, because I thought that he was going to be the missing piece for that defensive line last year to make it an elite defensive line. And he was just kind of a depth guy that you threw in at the end of games. So hopefully he can make that step. I'm going to put him on that starting lineup. You can put James Smith in there. I know he's probably more of a defensive tackle type guy, but you can play defensive end if you really need him to. But I do have him up there in subs. But I'm going to put Bo Atkinson there. It would really deeply sadden me again for him to, not be a guy that you can look and kind of lean on here this season. We'll see what he can do, but I'm not really expecting much out of Bo Atkinson. Would I love to be proved wrong? Absolutely. I think Bo Atkinson and Kenyatta Jackson on opposite sides would be really, really good for Kenyatta Jackson, because that will take some, attention away from him. And then you're going to go to the middle of this defense, which is probably going to be your biggest question mark. Earl Little Jr. is going to be a corner, so don't worry about him. We'll talk about him in a second. But Peyton Pierce and Christian Alagarno, I think is how you pronounce that name. I'm honestly not that positive. But he was a linebacker out of Wisconsin. And he was all over the field when Ohio State played Wisconsin last year. And then I think he ended up actually breaking his wrist or his hand that game, was out for maybe a quarter or two, came back in late in that game and decided to play for the rest of the season with, like his arm in his hand in basically a cast. And, you're playing linebacker. That's a very physical position on the football field. And he was one of the bright spots for Wisconsin's defense, and honestly, a good bright spot for Wisconsin as a whole, which ended up becoming a failure of a season last year. He was one of the few bright spots. He enters the portal, comes out at Ohio State. I really do like the fit here. It's all about what is his ceiling and what is his floor, obviously. But from what I saw, and it was only a 1-game sample size, but from what I saw at Wisconsin, I'm expecting some big things from him. And maybe this is not a one-and-done type thing for him at Ohio State. Maybe he stays for another year. But I would love it if he can take a leap and maybe come back and be a presence that we kind of all need for next year's defense. Peyton Pierce, he was a guy that, could have started at Ohio State, but it was the fact that you had so many guys like Sonny Styles on the team last year that was kind of just like, what are you going to do with Peyton Pierce? I believe he had a pretty good game against Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. He had a couple of flashes, but not your full starter last year. He's now going to be in that spot that Sonny Styles was last season, so hopefully he can keep up those expectations. And then you're going to go to the corner room, which I believe is probably next to the linebacker room going to be your biggest question mark. The defensive line has Kenyatta Jackson. That is going to be I don't want to guarantee Kenyatta Jackson is going to be a first-round pick, but I think he will end up getting drafted this coming NFL draft. But, so that'll work out with itself, regardless of how good the other players around him play. He'll get some good moments in the season. Linebackers, there are some guys here that have experience. It's just a matter of, can we lean on them like we did last season? And obviously I don't expect these guys to be as good as Sonny Styles was in that linebacker room was last year. I don't want the ceiling to be raised at all, but I also don't want the floor to completely crumble underneath them. So that is my big concern. And then you have secondary, which is going to be not necessarily a huge question mark, but a question mark. Jermaine Matthews, there's questions about him being a number 1 corner. I know that was the same thing with David Igbinosun last year, and even with Denzel Burke the year before, but Denzel Burke probably had a lot more confidence going into that season because although he was not the most consistent corner in the world, he was still a guy that you could look forward to and knew that he was going to be a number 1 option. Jermaine Matthews was kind of the number 2 to number 4 guy, the guy that you were kind of putting in when Igbinosun needed a break last year. And, he's a talker. He is a talker. And, maybe you want that from your corners. If you remember the Tennessee game, he was talking trash to a camera about the SEC. He got the belt out against Michigan last year. So after the game, post game on the field, So he's a talker, and I like his personality as a corner. It's just a matter of can he live up to that. And Devin Sanchez, kind of the same thing there. Not as much of a talker from what I could tell, but he it's still same question marks that Jermaine Matthews kind of does a little bit there. Earl Little Jr., I believe he actually was injured for last season and played at Florida State, coming in from Florida State, I should say. And there is some question marks about his injury history there. So we'll see what that kind of happens. I'm hoping that he can kind of be a number 2 or number 3 guy that, you can either, if Jermaine Matthews can hold up, maybe you can switch Earl Little Jr. and Devin Sanchez, and maybe Devin Sanchez can come back into the slot where I believe he was last year. But if he is a slot guy, I'm not really familiar with Earl Little Jr., honestly. I've seen a few highlight tapes, but I believe he was actually injured last season, so not a whole lot there. But we'll see. This is going to be an interesting thing because there's not a lot of depth in that cornerback room right now, with Davis Igbinosun leaving, Denzel Burke leaving a few years ago, and Caleb Downs is not going to be there. Obviously, I know obviously he plays a different position than corner. He played safety, strong safety, but that those safeties help and they take away a lot of stuff that maybe you're not going to see. And a lot of people feared Caleb Downs last year. It was like, the Myles Garrett thing. With Myles Garrett now off of the Browns, teams are going to attempt stuff that they would never dare to do with Myles Garrett on the field. Same thing here. Teams are going to probably try this Ohio State defense and do stuff that maybe you would never dare to do because Caleb Downs was on the field and he was in the box and being that help and being that boogeyman type of player that that Ohio State defense kind of thrived on last year. Caleb Downs was a guy that you would never throw to under any circumstances unless you were down big. And when you were down big, Caleb Downs shut the door on you. Whether it was a few years ago with the game-sealing interception, or it was, another interception against Penn State last year, or it was the big hit against Michigan last year, or if it was a couple of fumbles that Caleb Downs forced, against Miami. And of course, Ohio State did not end up recovering those fumbles, but he was still there to make those fumbles happen against a guy like Mark Fletcher, who was running over that Ohio State defense. But anyways, that's going to be a big question is this cornerback room. Now, the safety room, I do have a lot of faith in. Terry Moore is coming in from Duke. We'll see what he can do. Jalen McLean at strong safety, I have him there. We'll see what he does. I have a lot more confidence in the safety room than I do the corners. And maybe the same thing I'm talking about with like a boogeyman type thing, but instead of just Caleb Downs, it's going to be Jalen McLean and Terry Moore. And you can obviously flip-flop Terry Moore and Jalen McLean, but that's what I have right there. I think Terry Moore is going to be a little bit more athletic, so I put him at strong or at free safety, kind of take away those big plays. But we'll see. If he slots into the strong safety role and McLean has to go out to free safety, that's fine with me. I don't see safety being a weakness for Ohio State. I see that being one of their best strengths on the defense. Matt Patricia is going to still be Matt Patricia, hopefully, of last year. And you're not going to have a player's coach like Caleb Downs, but it's going to, this is where coordinators kind of get more comfortable is year 2. Maybe, Caleb Downs was kind of there to limit a little bit of Matt Patricia's hiccups, especially early in the season at Ohio State. Now he's more, familiar with the system and what Ryan Day likes to do, whether that's during the offseason or during any other stuff there during the season. But you just got to wait and see here. And I'm hoping that, the defense can kind of scheme their way into a lot of big plays, and maybe this defense is more opportunistic than last year's defense was. Last year's defense was kind of a playback type of defense, let you get to the red zone, but as soon as you get to the red zone, we're going to shut you down. And that's kind of Ohio State's style the past couple of years, and that's kind of been to their own detriment really ever since the 2022 season. That's kind of been their style of game plan regardless of coordinator. Obviously, Jim Knowles coming in in 2022. He brought a more aggressive style, then ended up hurting them against Michigan with the big run plays and costing them the game. They flip completely and ended up yet again costing them the game at Michigan because they just could not get a stop, because for whatever reason Jim Knowles did not want to bring that free safety back down and get another edge rusher in the box against a elite offensive line of Michigan. And Ohio State ends up losing that game. And then, in 2024, you have, guys like Caleb Downs, Jack Sawyer, JTT, Sonny Styles, and Denzel Burke, Davis Igbinosun, everybody on that defense, and it just did not matter. The scheme for sure helped, and Jim Knowles is a great defensive coordinator, but that defense, those players made that defense. Jim Knowles did not make that defense. The players made that defense in 2024, and that was why they were one of the best defenses probably of the past couple of years. Of course, Georgia's defense is going to be probably better. Michigan's defense from the year before is probably going to have something to say about that. And I can go on and on and on, but Ohio State's, that's probably their best defense since 2019. Last year's defense exceeded that after losing a bunch of people from that championship run. It was really unexpected to see such a jump from last year, but you're gonna get, the roller coaster is gonna come down eventually, and I'm really hoping that, if it does come down, maybe it's not as much as we're thinking. This defense could honestly be a really serviceable defense, and that offense can really improve, or we can see another version of the 2021 and 2022 defenses where they are paper tigers, and when you punch them back, they kind of fold. I'm really, really hoping we're not back to that. I think Matt Patricia is, too good for that almost, but I could very well be wrong. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but with this offense being what it is right now, I'm hoping that it does not matter how good or how bad this defense is. That offense is just going to be so good that it's not going to matter at the end of the day. And hopefully it can translate to wins, because, that's another thing. A team like, let's say, Oklahoma could have such a better offense and maybe a little bit worse of a defense, but it could result in more losses than last year because they have that tough schedule. Ohio State has one of their toughest schedules that they've really ever had in the modern era. And it's going to be up to this defense to stop elite offenses that they're going to play. Texas, Indiana, Oregon. We'll see what Iowa does. There's so many teams that can give Ohio State problems, and you always have to be ready. There's going to be no off week this season, and we just got to wait and see. This is not going to be a season where you're going to skate by and just fast forward to the playoff. You're going to have to win every single game, and it's going to be a dogfight most weeks than not. So I can't wait to see what that goes through. Hopefully nothing bad happens before the start of the season in terms of player health, and hopefully everyone is ready to go by week 1 against Ball State, and even more importantly, week 2 in Austin. So that is going to do it for this week. I'm hoping that all of you are having a great 4th of July week. Hopefully you guys are having a great summer. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.